really important stuff and like the like first one. And say, then you can find different. I ate it. Peanut butter brownie.
My allergies are acting up. My eyes are watering. Oh no.
You brought your napkin.
Yes, I could. I appreciate it.
So there's other
I
stuff.
may sneak over.
Harry over. There's refreshments. There's refreshments over there.
I saw. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Thank you.
I'm sold
So is Chuck Shaw this year? I know that Karen is. But I didn't know that.
Yeah, because there's a different name.
No, this is someone else, so I don't know. He's doing it virtually.
I have to sit at the front.
Okay, so we're going to get started. We have a quorum, and we have one of the committee members is on virtually, and that's Mr. Parks. And so we want to welcome Mr. Parks. He's Mr. Ferguson's representative. And I'm going to pass it over to the chair.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll do some introductions. I think we have some new people. And I'll start at the very end, and I don't know your name, and I can't see you from here, so.
Or even know. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about myself? Or
No, you're good.
Okay.
Ryan Rossi.
Faith Schulst. Whoa. That sounded loud. Faith Schulstrom, representing Frank Barbieri.
Carmen Campbell, appointee of Marcia Andrews.
Sherry Brown, representing Erica Whitfield.
Heather Frederick, Chief Financial Officer.
Nicole Smith, Director of Federal and State Programs.
Joseph Sanchez, Chief Operating Officer.
Director Kevin McCormick, Exceptional Student Education.
Good morning, Marcia Andrews, School Board Member, District 6, represented the school board for the Budget Committee.
Frank Barbieri, School Board District 5, and I'm just here as a guest. So.
Great, thank you. We have 2 minutes. We didn't have the May 5th attached at our last meeting, so we have minutes from May 5th and June 16th. If I can get a motion to approve.
So move.
Thank you, Faith.
Second.
Thank you, Carmen. All in favor, all opposed, motion carries unanimously. And I'll turn it over to Heather.
Thank you. So the only change that I made on the presentation that I sent out to you is I just reordered it a little bit. I moved up the capital section before the special revenue because Mr. Sanchez has another meeting that he needs to get to. So I was very thankful that he was willing to change his schedule to stop by before that. And I also want to welcome Mr. Brooks, Corey Brooks. He's the representative for the principals. And so it's nice to have them on call. So if we have any questions that are where we can get a real school-based perspective, we have a principal representative. So I'm going to start with a brief overview of the new strategic plan, because since our last committee meeting back in June, the district and the board adopted a new strategic plan. I'm going to give a brief update of where we are for FY23, some changes in the FY23 budget that we're excited about, a brief legislative update because the legislative session hasn't officially started yet, but there are some bills that could have devastating impact on the district that have been proposed, so we'll go over those. And then since this is the first meeting of the year and we do have so many committee members, I'm going to give an overview of just understanding our school budget, how it's built, and what comprises the budget. and then a timeline of the FY24 budget development process. So looking at the strategic plan, it actually started back in spring of 2021, where there was a survey that went out to constituents. They received nearly 30,000 responses, which is impressive, you know, because I know with our last strategic plan, we did not have that much participation. And the top priorities of the survey was mental health and social emotional, which has been an area that the district has been investing in heavily as part of the referendum. And it was beneficial, all the resources we put in place, because it wasn't because of COVID. We implemented that prior to COVID, but we saw a lot of benefit when the students started to come back and after the impacts and dealing with the impacts of COVID. So all the co-located service providers that we had in place, the mental health professionals that we had at each of the school sites, it really, our district has been on the forefront of providing mental health and wellness to our students. School safety is a priority, as well as accelerated student learning. You know, fast forward to December, you know, a year ago, the superintendent was continuing to get feedback from the constituents and presented to the board in the spring of last year and worked through several different workshops, and it was finally adopted. Let me see, I don't see the adopted date on here, but it was in, I believe, September, August or September, we adopted the new plan. So there are 4 strategic themes: academic excellence and growth, student-focused culture, mental health and wellness, and committed and impactful employees. And we have several objectives and initiatives within each of those strategic themes. And where we've really been focusing on is at, you know, the bottom of the slide, the educate, affirm, and inspire. And, you know, that's our goal of what we want to do and achieve with all of our students. And what's different with this strategic plan from the previous strategic plan is right now we're working on developing detailed metrics and measurements to ensure that this plan doesn't just, you know, stay on the shelf, but we take these initiatives and we can actually see improvements that we're monitoring throughout the life of the plan. And so right now we are working on identifying those initiatives and identifying what those measurements and milestones are going to be. And this is just a reminder from the December 7th board meeting. The board identified what their board priorities are when we're developing the budget. We are still continuing to address the unfinished learning that was a result of COVID. It has been difficult. There was quite a bit of loss of learning. It was challenging for the students. It was challenging for the staff. And we're still working through. And we received a significant amount of money in ESSER. And we've been investing that, you know, in the teachers, in the students, and academic programs. We are required to comply with local, state, and federal regulations, and there continues to be many that come from the state especially, and they're usually unfunded state mandates. And Mr. Burke the Superintendent Burke did a presentation recently to the Legislative Committee showing the laws and how it's grown. You know, it went from, I think it was 400 pages to over 1,200 pages. You know, just the number of State Board of Education rules, and it has been, you know, quite onerous. We have to make sure that we maintain our facilities, and we're thankful to have Mr. Sanchez, you know, leading that initiative, and then to maintain our budget reserves, because our ESSER funds, we received nearly $600 million. Those funds are ending June 30th of 2024. So we've made an effort to be proactive, you know, using those on one-time initiatives, and the staffing that we put within those funds, we had a plan to move those back into our vacant teacher positions because they can easily be absorbed just as part of our normal attrition. So with the FY23, FY23 budget, there was a change that we had, a big investment in musical instruments. So, and we're utilizing our ESSER funds, and we rolled this out in January. It's approximately $10 million, and it's primarily to purchase actual instruments for the schools. So it's a good use of the ESSER funds because the instruments can last 10 years or more. And so we're using the ESSER funds to pay for the instruments, the investment of the instruments, and we're using our referendum dollars in order to fund the teaching and the academic pieces, the recurring pieces of this program. We have a new individual who's in charge of the music program, and he wanted to make sure that we weren't rolling it out to every single elementary school. It was on a voluntary basis. We have 30 elementary schools that have currently agreed to participate in the program, because you have to make sure that the school has the ability to implement the initiative, that actually wants to support the music initiative, because we can give them the instruments and then they're just going to sit on the shelf. So we have to make sure that they're going to support the curriculum. It's not going to be an after-school program. It's going to be embedded within the school day, because he felt that if it was an after-school program, that was something that wasn't going to have the impact that was necessary. And so we're focusing on schools that had a music program already, and for those that don't and are new, he's building a staff that's going to be managed centrally to rotate to each of the schools. And so I wanted to make sure that it was sustainable, so that's why we've had growth within the referendum funds as a result of the increase in the property values. So we've built the staffing within the referendum so it can be sustainable. And then we also added within the referendum repair funds, so as the instruments break, that we're able to repair them, and then also supplies, because you need reeds, you need books, you need music, so we've built that into the referendum so that we can make sure that it's sustainable. And it's a true program that is going to be part of the academic school day. And so that for the elementary schools, like I said, there's 30 so far who have volunteered to participate. We set aside an additional reserve of funds because we assume once the program's rolled out that there are going to be some additional schools that want to participate. Then for the secondary schools, all the secondary schools will be receiving an additional allocation. So were there any questions?
Yeah. Does this allow students to have an instrument both at home and at school?
I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that question, whether they'll be allowed to take it home.
But some of the instruments are difficult to do that with, and so
To have multiple instruments because of the size of them so that they
Right.
can practice at home. I do not believe that was contemplated, but I'll find out. And I should have had Mr. Maloon here in order to speak about it, because he is the expert on the topic.
thank you.
Ms. Andrews?
The schools are so excited about this. Some schools don't have a music program at all, or they have a fledgling program because they don't have the instrument and the support needed. This is so exciting. It gets levels playing fields for the children. Arts, academics all go together for top student achievement. It's a big deal for Palm Beach County to be able to do this, so thank you so much.
And it's a true partnership between the principal and the teaching and learning department, because we're not just giving a standard set of musical instruments to each school. It's based on whatever that principal feels is going to work best at the school site. So some might be a steel band program, others might be a vocal program. They want to make sure that whatever it is, it's going to be supported by the school community. So he's working closely with each principal to develop what that program is going to look like. And so they are really excited. And so we received the third calculation, and so for the year, which is based on our October enrollment. So as a school district, we are funded based on our actual enrollment from 1 week in October and 1 week in February. And so after the October count, we have to wait for the Department of Ed to calculate all the numbers and say, this is what your actual enrollment was, and now we're going to adjust all of your funding because now we're comparing it to what we were projected to have. So if you start with row 1, our projected enrollment, so that's up at the top, 194,000 students was the projected enrollment. We were at 193,000, so it was 1,200 less than projected. But that enrollment includes not only district-operated schools, it also includes charter schools, as well as vouchers. And so when we get to the next slide, you'll see it really didn't have an impact to us, because it just means that vouchers, because I had set aside additional money for vouchers and charter schools, and they didn't grow as much as what I had anticipated, so I had already had that set aside as a reserve, so it wasn't, ended up being a wash. So we had it set aside in order to, in essence, send the money back. In looking at, so if you jump down to row, and I see that the numbers are messed up, but with the second 37, row 37, district-operated schools, we were pretty much on target where we thought we were going to be with our growth, and it was with charter schools and the McKay, Gardner, and FES, those two were both down. So it resulted in our net district funding going down a little less than $10 million, but I'd had that set aside in a reserve. And in looking at the chart to the right-hand side, something that I thought was very interesting is I just took the actual enrollment, divided that by the funding that was actually passed through to each of the different subcategories. And district and charter schools are receiving around the same amount of money. So if you look at FY22, we received around $8,300 per student, but the vouchers received on average $8,900 per student. And then if you look at FY23, the district and charter schools received around $8,700 per student, and the vouchers received $10,100 per student. And I received a question as to whether, that was because they have more special needs kids. Is that the reason why? But a lot of them, they usually don't have those high needs ESE students. And so to be honest with you, I don't know how the calculation works. And we had the same issue last year during FY22. And the Florida Department of Ed ended up doing an adjustment in the fourth calculation, the last one of the year, and we ended up getting back $20 million. I don't know that they're going to do the same adjustment this year, because they really have not provided the calculation that they use to allocate the funds to these vouchers. And the money for the vouchers doesn't flow through us like it does for charter schools. That's paid directly by the state to the private schools. I think through an intermediary like Step Up or something like that. And in looking at our historical enrollment, the blue bar is enrollment in district-operated schools. So we had a pretty steady increase. You could see from 2013 to 2020, a steady increase in enrollment. And then we had a pretty significant drop as a result of COVID. And we've been able to maintain. So there are other districts that continue to go down. We were able to maintain our enrollment, and we went up about 550 students this past year. The orange bar is charter schools. So you can see charter schools, they didn't grow. They grew less than what district-operated schools grew. They only grew about 300 FTE last year. The growth is really in the vouchers. So the voucher program, what was implemented, the expansion of the voucher program was in 2020. So you can see there was a significant increase. Well, actually, I guess it was 22. Well, because it was about 1,500. It was always around 1,500 for the vouchers because that was McKay. So and then they started to expand the voucher program, and they've been changing and increasing the eligibility of the students that are eligible. But you can see it went from 2,100 to 3,000 to 6,200 to nearly 8,000 students in just a few years. And so it's only, I'll be able to get to during the legislative update, there's a proposal to create a universal voucher program, pretty much eliminating all eligibility requirements other than being a school-age child in the state of Florida. And including homeschool students. And so that, pretty much it would take, and it's, wait, now I'm jumping ahead. So let me just wait so that way I can show you when I go through the.
So it looks to me that like the kids who are already in private schools are getting additional state money because it goes up so much. So is that, an accurate impression?
That's accurate. It is, because when you look at what happened during COVID, there was a slight spike in the private schools enrollment, but then it went back down again. But we're still seeing the spike in the vouchers. So all it's doing is the students that never would have been in public school are just now receiving public funding.
So the taxpayers of Palm Beach County are paying for more of the private school students?
Correct, right. And then with the proposed new bill, House Bill 1 that's out there, it would, right now, there are some income eligibility requirements. With House Bill 1, it eliminates the income eligibility requirements, and it's just, and there's also, there were some requirements that you had to have attended a public school in the past. Then last year, they removed that requirement, and so each year, they've just been expanding it, and that's why we've been seeing the exponential increase.
Thank you.
So every other year, when you're looking at the legislative cycle, every odd year, the legislative session starts in March, which is very difficult because I have to release school budgets in February. So I'm releasing budgets prior to actually even knowing what our funding is going to be. Our funding is set primarily by the state legislature. The board has very limited authority of our funding that we receive. They have the ability to ask the voters for a referendum, but they're restricted on how much they can ask for and also how long we can actually receive the money. So we have to, for the referendum we currently have in place, we have to go back to the voters every 4 years to continue that. And there's caps, like I said, on what the board is allowed to go and ask the voters for. So we start with the State Board of Education legislative budget request. They released that in August. That used to be, in the past, the high water mark. They used to ask for, the most amount of money. Now it's inconsequential. It doesn't even matter what the State Board of Ed is asking for. It's all what's coming from the governor and the state legislature. There's a long-range financial outlook that the state is required to prepare, and that's to ensure that, we keep a balanced budget, and, that's not something that every state does, and it's a very detailed long-range financial outlook, something that is updated throughout the year, and something we utilized in order to know, how the state stands in terms of their funding. The governor then releases his budget, depending on, whether we're starting in January or March. Since this year we're starting in March, he releases the budget in January, sometimes January, but more into February. And so we did finally receive the budget, and that was why I delayed our last meeting so that we would have some more concrete numbers to look at. The session is going to start March 7th, and then it ends May 5th. And so the governor's budget has been released, and I didn't update that, but I did update the information within the presentation. And I have more details on the House Bill 1 is the school choice universal voucher program, and that's the one that pretty much eliminates all eligibility requirements. And that is going to have would have a negative outlook on our district. And when I go through the governor's budget, I can show that in more detail. During the last legislative cycle, there was a proposal that we share our capital funds with charter schools, and that there be a study by OPAGA that would be released no later than January 1st on whether we should share those funds. So that study was released at the end of December, and OPAGA recommended that we do share capital funds, but not on a per student basis, on a needs basis, which they said would be very difficult to actually administer. So far, we haven't seen anything brought up within any House bills or any proposals to share capital funds, but we do expect that something is going to come out during the legislative cycle. And we've also heard that there could be changes to FEFP, that's the Florida Education Finance Program, and how we're funded in the state of Florida, of taking some of the categoricals, because a lot of the funding we receive is restricted for specific purposes, and collapsing it into what we call the base student allocation, which we have flexibility on how we spend those funds. And the reasoning behind that is since they're passing through categoricals, a portion of the categoricals to the vouchers, which is the private schools, that would give them a reason to pass them through, because right now they're passing the money through to the private schools, yet they don't have the same restrictions we do. So for example, the money is set aside, a certain amount of the money we receive is set aside for instructional materials. It can only be spent on instructional materials. Certain amount is for mental health. It can only be spent on mental health, and we have to track it internally. Certain amount is set aside for teacher raises. It can only be used for teacher raises. But right now, the private schools are getting a lump sum, and they can use it however they want. So with the state outlook from the Office of Economic and Demographic Research, who prepares the long-range financial outlook, the state has a really positive financial outlook. Their reserves are going to increase to $17 billion, or 41% of general revenue. But there are some risks, the same risks that we have. A lot of the reason why they have an increase in their reserves is because of the ESSER funds that they've received, or the federal funds. And so a lot of the reserves that are built up, it's all one time, just like ours. So you have to be very careful. The state has to be very careful in how they spend those funds, that they're not spending it on recurring expenses, but it's also that they're looking at non-recurring initiatives in order to make them sustainable. So this is the first year when we're looking at, the last 2 years when we're looking at the long-range financial outlook, everything can be fully funded. With the legislative budget request, they were looking at a proposed increase of 45,000 students, which is going to be much different than what the governor's proposal is. They were looking at a $70 increase in the base student allocation. If we compared that to what we received in FY23, we received $230 per student, and a 5% increase. You know, so the legislative budget request was really on the low end, whereas like I told you before, they used to be at the high water mark, and now they're really at the bottom. They were looking to maintain the teacher compensation as well as enhance some of the categoricals. The governor released his initiatives. This was his like pretty flashy little one-pager of what it was going to look like. And then I'll be able to get into that in more detail when I go through the governor's budget in detail. So we have the current budget right now is a little over $5 billion. When it was adopted, when the budget was adopted by the board, it was a little less than $5 billion. The reason why with the amended budget we've gone over $5 billion is as we receive our grant awards, they get added to the budget, and so that's what bumped us over the $5 billion mark. In looking at the general fund is the largest piece of our total budget, and it's all of our day-to-day operating costs. And so our general fund budget is $2.5 billion. And that's where all the day-to-day operations for the schools, our electricity, everything that's not capital related or grant related, what does it take to really run our district? That's $2.5 billion. So I'm going to get more in detail on the schools as well as the referendum. But we have a portion, 8% is we have to pass through to charter schools. So the money comes into us, but we pass it through to charter schools. McKay, we're looking at 1% of the total budget is for the family empowerment scholarships, and the amount that we don't pass through to us, but is actually, if you were to look at the FEFP funding formula, what is passed through to them is shown as going to Palm Beach County School District. It's just not physically passed through to us for us to send to the private schools. It's just sent directly from the state. The departments make up about 8% of the budget. We have 3% of our budget is set aside for the board contingency, and that's by board policy. So each year we have to, based on our increase in revenue, we have to increase our the amount we have set aside for the contingency to comply with our board policy. We spend 2% on utilities. Sick and annual leave is 1%. And then capital maintenance transfer, that's 5% of our budget. So what the statute allows us to pay for things like property insurance, like some of our tradespeople when they're fixing things. So they're not technically, we can't put them in the capital projects fund because it's not a capitalizable capital project, but we're allowed to use capital funds for it. So we take money from the capital projects fund, we transfer it to the general fund in order to pay for those costs. And then we have about 4% of the budget is for non-FEFP funded initiatives. So our VPK program, that's not funded through the Florida Education Finance Program. Our after-school program is not financed through the Florida Education Finance Program. That's mainly funded through fee collection from the parents. Our adult and community ed, that is money we receive from the state, but it's outside of the Florida Education Finance Program, and it has to be tracked for adult ed purposes. We can't use adult ed money on K-12 initiatives, and we can't use our K-12 money for adult ed initiatives. It has to be tracked separately. And then we have some miscellaneous local funds as well. So in looking at the allocation formulas, we have 70% of our total budget is school budgets. And our school budgets are based on staffing formulas. So we look at a projected enrollment at each of the school sites, and based on that projected enrollment, we allocate a set number of staff, whether it's teaching staff, ESC staff, ESOL staff. We don't look at the revenue generated by that school, we look at the needs of that school. And so we have a fixed formula so that every school receives the same amount based on eligibility of their students. And after the budget is released, our policy does require that the school receive input from the School Advisory Council, but that budget is truly developed centrally here at the district. And there are other districts that do it differently, where they actually allocate funds based on what's generated by the students at that school. But the smaller the school, the harder it is to actually, the money that you generate is not enough to provide adequate staffing for the school sites. So we look at it strictly based on a needs basis across all of our schools versus looking at the funding that they generate. We do have different ways within our formula to differentiate how the teacher formula is rounded based on free and reduced lunch. And so it really only has an impact of adding one additional teacher to a school. But if we were to look at an elementary school that has a free and reduced lunch percentage of 95% or more, and when we do the calculation to say how many teachers is this school going to generate based on the number of students they have, it's not going to come out to a perfect 11 or a perfect 12. There's always decimal points. And so if we were to have a school that has 95% or greater, and they're just over that mark, so they would be 11.01 would be what the calculation would be, we round them up to 12 teachers because we can't give them a portion of a teacher. For those schools less than 95% free and reduced lunch, they would round down to 11 teachers. So when we're going through the formula, we have different when we're rounding up versus when we're rounding down, and we differentiate that based on that free and reduced lunch percentage.
Can you give us, at a later time, the demographic breakout of the students in terms of free and reduced lunch, and also the number of schools that are at high levels and maybe above 50% that free and reduced by its lunch?
I can provide that, and then in addition, just this year, we switched over to the CEP program, which is the Community Eligibility Program, and all of our schools now qualify for free and reduced lunch. And not only free and reduced lunch, it's free lunch as well as free breakfast. And so the free and reduced lunch percentage that we used in the past is now going away, and we're using this new metric, which is directly certified. And so it's slightly different. And I'll have to give you like a crosswalk as to how can we equate it to what people know as the free and reduced lunch percentage.
I think it's important for us to have that kind of data to know something about the students that are being served and where the funds are going. So thank you.
Yep.
Whatever you think we should get.
Okay, and I know I have provided that in the past because we do have there's a plethora of information available on the state website that breaks out all the demographic information, and it's interesting to compare from district to district. They have this historical, the public can go on and do different pie charts, and the information the state has available is, we're called the Sunshine State for a reason. Everything is out in the public. We send so much data to the state. So when the federal government came out with additional requirements for Title I, that we had to report this information, Florida had been reporting that information publicly of what schools were getting for 20 years. So it wasn't new to us, but for other states, they were scared to have the information out there. All right, so when we're looking at the local programs, we have the vocational program, the Choice Magnet program. So vocational is an additional $20 million of resources that are vocational teachers that are allocated to middle and high schools, and that's in addition to their regular teacher allocation. We also have a Choice Magnet program, so that's $17 million in resources that's allocated over and above their regular allocation. We have a summer program that's $7.5 million that we had moved to the ESSER fund. And so this year in FY24, I'm moving that back, at least the portions I can move back to the general fund, because there was another grant that we received for the summer reading program. So we're leaving the summer reading program and the new grant from the state, but I want to start reabsorbing some of the expenses that we moved over to ESSER, because I don't want to wait until ESSER ends on June 30th. So the summer program is one of those that we're bringing back into the general fund this year. And then we also have some miscellaneous other school programs. So we allocate additional resources based on whether there's a need for 504 or ADA accommodations, and those change every year. And for we work very closely with the ESE department on what resources are needed. We allocate additional funds to schools for gender equity, so that's for our middle schools and high schools, and so specifically so that they can provide and pay for equipment for female sports, so that we can have equal access. The state has very specific categoricals, and so when we're looking at the funding formula, the state tells us how much they're going to pay us, and they also tell us how we're going to spend it. So they give us money that's specifically for teacher pay. We get money that's specifically for APIB. We get money that's specific for supplemental academic instruction, for instructional materials, for mental health. And we have to track that within our budget, and we have to say how much we spent. If we don't spend all of the funds, we have to carry it over to future years, and that's something we report to the state on an annual basis. So in addition to the Florida Education Finance Program funding, the board had approved going to the voters for an additional $1 million for specific purposes. So it was initially a $0.25 million in 2018. We increased it to $1 full million. And at that time, the $0.25 million was paying for the elementary art, music, and PE teachers, career, and choice. And so we're now, so in 2018, the board said that we needed to increase that. And so to continue to pay for the fine arts teachers, as well as add mental health, as well as add security, and to also add teacher recruitment and retention supplements. So about half of it goes to teacher recruitment and retention supplements, a quarter for fine arts, and a quarter for mental health and security. So it's now at $276 million, which represents approximately 10% of our district budget. And we were very thankful to the voters for them supporting with an overwhelming majority of 74% to continue to renew this referendum for another 4 years. So that was just approved by the voters in November. Because otherwise we'd be having a very different discussion right now if this was not approved. We have an oversight committee the Independent Referendum Oversight Committee that meets quarterly. This is the first page of the report that I provide to that committee to show how the funds are spent. It's not how they're budgeted, it's what's actually spent. So it's based on filled positions. So that 775 is filled positions. It does not include vacant positions. So our school budgets are going to be released by February 20th. So with our projected enrollment, right now we're looking at a projected enrollment of around 1,000 students. When we're using our projected enrollment, the projected enrollment is used for the regular teacher allocation, but the way we project our enrollment for ESE and ESOL is we pull the students that are in the district right now. So we use January 19th, and we looked at the schools, looked at the ESE and ESOL students in those schools at that time, and that's what we use in order to calculate what the staffing is going to be for the next year. And then come count day, so 11 days into the start of school, we'll do an adjustment based on the actual enrollment. We met with the principals on January 17th. We have no changes to the school allocation, so we're keeping everything the same. The only change for next year is that we had allocated, and we've been using the ESSER money to do a step-down approach in terms of teaching staff. So we lost about 6,000 students after COVID, and so we did not fully align our staffing based on enrollment. We each year have been adjusting it by about 50% because we were hopeful that we were going to see an increase in enrollment, and we didn't want to give up the teaching positions if we were going to see that increase in enrollment because it's difficult to hire. And so each year we've been, letting schools keep positions over and above what they generated and then just reducing them each year. So this year we're going to fully align based on enrollment. Our department budgets, we go through a detailed department budget review, and each department head will sit with the superintendent. We have meetings, a week of meetings, that are spread throughout the month of March, where the superintendent will meet with each department head. They walk through their budgets, and we review what there are any potential needs. So with the FY24, starting to look at FY24 budget update and where we stand, health premiums, we haven't had to increase our health premiums for 10 years. We have made some slight plan design changes, but we've always trended well below on our health claims compared to the national trends. Our school district, we're self-funded, so we've saved a lot of money over the past 10 years because we were not seeing rate increases of 10, 15, 20% like a lot of other organizations were seeing. Since we were self-funded, we were able to keep all of those savings within the fund. After COVID, we saw a pretty significant spike in claims. Our actuary at the time wanted us and proposed that we increase our premiums. We wanted to hold. My recommendation was we've always been below the national trend. We have enough money built up in the fund to take a bit of a reduction and still comply with the state regulations. Let's see where the claims actually settle. So our claims were projected by the actuary to go up about 3%. We're seeing that they're going down about 1.5% compared to the prior year. I would have liked to see it a little bit more of a reduction, but we are looking at that our claims are at this point exceeding our premiums. And so we have been working with the unions to put them on notice that we need to monitor, and if the claims do not continue to decrease, we are going to have to do something because we do have to comply with the state mandate, which shows that we have 60 days of claims set aside as a reserve within the fund balance. Looking at FRS, it's expected to increase. Initially, I thought it was expected to increase 1%, but with the release of the governor's budget, he also released the FRS budget as well, our plan for the FRS rates. His proposal included, the first part of it was a 1% increase, which is what was expected based on the past several years. They've wanted to just reinforce the funding of the Florida retirement system, which is really one of the most well-funded plans in the country. But in addition to that, he added a cost of living adjustment of 4% for everybody who was retired on or before June 30th of 2022. And I'm calculating the impact of that to be between 1.5% to 2.5%, which means that we'll see an increase in our FRS rate potentially between $25 million and $35 million. We're continuing to review the ESSER funds, and like I said, start to bring costs back into the general fund. We had an increase, just I mentioned already summer school, but in our custodial supplies, we buy now more soap, we buy more paper towels, so our cost of supplies has increased, and so we've been able to cover that increase within ESSER. Now we're going to bring that back into the general fund, or put that back in the general fund, because that's now just part of our standard operating costs. So I'm trying to take things and bring them back in slowly to minimize that funding cliff come June 30th, 2024. And so
Back on the health premiums, do we do any kind of wellness programs?
We do, and our district has, well, Mr. Barbieri is here, and I know he's not a fan of our wellness program, but we do have a wellness program that has been in place. We've been very proactive with the wellness plan, and we do believe that that is part of the reason why we do have we are well below the national trend in terms of claims, because we have certain biometrics that you have to meet, and you know, based on that, the whole purpose of it is, you know, if you are found to have diabetes, you catch it early, because if you catch it early, you can manage it, and costs or claim costs are going to be lower than if you wait until it's more advanced. But our program can be a little hard to navigate, and there are a lot of requirements. And so there have been recommendations that we look to make the program easier. Mr. Barbieri, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. I don't participate in the program. I've got a college degree and a law degree, and I can't get through it. So I'm just amazed that we have as much participation as we have. It's so complicated to try and figure out, you know, the rally and all that other stuff that's in there. I mean, it's got to be simplified for our employees. I think we'd have much better participation. I'm not opposed to the wellness program. I just think it, like you said, it just needs to be fixed so that people that, you know, we have a lot of personnel in the district that aren't college educated, and if I can't figure it out, I can't imagine how some of those people can figure it out. So it just needs to be fixed so people can participate in it. So, you know, and it reduces their, you know, their premiums, what they're paying out of their check. But hopefully, you know, I've been complaining about this for a couple of years. Hopefully, sooner or later, the administration will fix it so people can understand how to get through it.
And we did hear you. I did hear you loud and clear at the board workshop. So we are looking at ways to make it easier.
So an accessible wellness program is what you're looking for.
More accessible. You know, for example, you know, one of the proposals that we're looking at is if you don't meet one of the biometric metrics that we have, you have to take coaching sessions, or there's different milestones that you have to complete. And then based on the timing of when those start and end, there are people that started them, but they don't finish them by the deadline we give them. So then they only get partial credit. You know, so there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. So we're looking at, in some cases, somebody might show up for their biometric and they're out of what our normal range is, but if they were to go to their doctor would say, no, you're fine. You don't have diabetes. And so we want to give that option. We're looking at potentially giving the option of, you can go, if you don't meet a biometric, one of the metrics, you go to your doctor, and your doctor can then sign off and say, you know, that they're working with you. Because that's the whole point of it, is we want to try to catch things early. So go to your doctor, make sure your doctor is aware of what is potentially going on so that you can be treated early, so that you can not be cured, but at least have it under control and you never get to that advanced stage. And so I'm open to meeting with you, Mr. Barbieri, on what your recommendations are in order to help make it a little bit easier. But it is worth a lot of money. So those who qualify get $600 off of their premium So it's a significant reward for that. And I was concerned in the beginning where I was like, gosh, if we do this, we're not going to be able to pay for that. We're gonna have to increase our premiums. But it turned out and you can never look back, unfortunately, and say exactly why our claims have been well below the national trends. But that has to be a part of it. That has to be a part of it. All right, so I just realized that the presentation that was up there was not the updated one. Let me see if this is. All right, I had these nice new charts. I'm like, where is everything? Am I crazy? Because, so, all right, so I did put a nice little chart here. But, okay, so here are some other legislative items. So let me just go back. I'm sorry. The governor's budget was released, but I'll go over that in more detail when I go through the governor's budget. Went through the HB1 is the school choice, increasing the cap from 1% to 3% annually. That's of the growth of total students. And then homeschool is also included in receiving the per student allocation. So that's capped at 20% and then would, $20,000 and would increase $20,000 each year. So $10,000 is part of the universal voucher program and $10,000 is part of the tax credit. HB 401 is sovereign immunity. There's a proposal right now to remove sovereign immunity. So as a school district, as a governmental agency, since we're funded by tax dollars and we can't go out of business because we have to provide a service, there's been a cap on what we are legally required to pay out. There is a process. There are certain Title IX claims and federal claims that are exempt from sovereign immunity. And then the state of Florida also has what's called a claims bill, where if there is a claim that the legislature, attorneys can take to the legislature and say, we really think that they deserve more than this, the legislature can approve a claims bill and go over those sovereign immunity caps. Last year, there was a bill that was filed that said they wanted to raise the caps of sovereign immunity. And we all said, no, you can't do that. We all fought back on it. So this year, now there's a House bill to remove all restrictions for sovereign immunity, and I think the purpose of it is so that we all say, well, at least just raise it, at least keep it. But I still want to keep it where it's at, because we have so many lawsuits, so many frivolous lawsuits, and then you don't know what the jury's going to do. There's so many times where it was like the district didn't do anything wrong, but the district is the big bad enemy, and think we have deep pockets in order to pay. So I'm, very concerned about, both the school choice and the sovereign immunity, significant concerns with those.
So that school choice is saying that if you homeschool your child, you get $20,000 a year?
No, it's capped at $20,000. 20,000 students are eligible to receive $10,000. So their parent could receive, instead of it going to the private school, they would receive the per student funding. Mm-hmm.
Do we know how many students are homeschooled?
I don't.
In the state?
I don't have that. But I can get.
Or
that
even
for you.
in our district.
We do keep track of the ones that are
We
in our
always had to
district.
monitor ours.
Yeah, we do. I can get you the number because I know we track it. All right. The next two are not a big deal. Not ones that are good or bad. I already talked about the OPAGA study. I already talked about this. I am sorry about that, but all right. So for the governor's budget. So the governor's budget proposed an increase of 5,294 students. If you were to look at his statewide projected increase in enrollment, it's 96,000 students. So the governor is building into his budget that voucher program is going to pass. Because if you look at what the projected increase in enrollment was for FY24 last year, it was only 40,000 students. So he's increasing it, he's more than doubling it. And so our share is $5,300, but again, that includes district-operated schools, charter schools, as well as vouchers. He's proposing of the base student allocation an increase of $126 or 2.64%. That's where we have the most flexibility in how we spend the funds. And then you can see each of the categoricals. The Safe School categorical, that increases $2.7 million. Increase in transportation, increase in the Florida Classroom Teacher Compensation Program of $13 million. But keep in mind, pieces of these get passed through to charter schools as well. So that is not only an increase to Palm Beach County schools, an increase in the mental health of $1.2 million. So the increase in per student allocation is $271, which is 3% increase in per student funding, which this past year we had a 5% increase in per student funding. We're projecting an increase in district operated schools of 1,000, of charter schools of 775, and the rest going to vouchers, or the majority going to vouchers, which right now is projected at 3,500. So that's going to result in an increase in vouchers of almost $40 million additional that would be flowing through to them. And then, so the net amount that the district would be receiving is $50 million. So $50 million seems like a lot until we get to what I was talking about earlier, that, you know, just starting with the increase in the FRS rate, we'd have to take easily $25 million off the top. So we're just going to start at $25 million at that point. Let me see, so I went through all of these. And so starting with the increase of the $51 million, we have to first take off the FRS, the increase in FRS off the top, so that's $25 million. We have to take out the increase in the teacher compensation funds, and the $10.9 million is net of what we have to pass through to charter schools. We are going to have to do something with health premiums, so in order to comply with the state regulations. I want to start bringing in some of the ESSER funds, like the summer school as well as the custodial supplies. We have to increase the contingency in order to maintain that 3%, to comply with board policy, so that's $4 million. Mr. Sanchez and I are going to have a meeting with FPL. I think it's next month, and the last meeting we had with them last year, they increased our rate like 10%. So it will be interesting to see what that meeting is about. I'm hopeful that they got their money last year and they're not asking for an additional increase this year.
Wishing you more success.
So that is, I'm going to have to wait and see what comes out of that meeting. Since we have a projected increase in enrollment of 1,000, we have to increase staffing in order to meet the needs of those students. So that increase is $5.8 million. And that doesn't include, we're reviewing additional adjustments for ESC and ESOL now. So I'm expecting we'll see another $2 million on top of that number. And then we also have, question?
Are we doing anything with solar in the district?
We don't have any major solar projects, but we have some solar in some of our schools.
Shouldn't we look more into solar with the increases like 10%? I mean, I can't see that going down. So we should probably, I mean, we're the sunshine state, so we have all these buildings out there that certainly have a lot of flat roofs, and it could be a lot of solar panels.
Yeah. I love that idea. I have a sustainability advisory committee, and they're considering a couple of recommendations to me, which I'll bring to the superintendent and bring to the board. So I'll make sure that's on our agenda.
We have our salary settlement, so it's actually our FY23 salary settlement, and we have to annualize it because certain of our bargaining groups, their start of the year is January 1st, and so we only have half the year in FY23, so I need to annualize what the total impact is going to be for FY24, so that's an additional $4.7 million. So we're looking at a shortfall of $5.9 million because we have to set aside the $10.9 million for the teacher compensation. And so we did expect that we would have some shortfalls, you know, as we're working through the closeout of the ESSER funds. So we have built up our fund balance over the past several years. So we will be able to absorb the shortfall, but we do have some other expenses out there, like health premiums could be a pretty significant increase, you know, so it's not good news. So originally I was very optimistic as to what this year would look like, and I was brought back to reality when I saw the governor's budget and then the increase in the FRS rates. And so I'm back to my old doom and gloom self that we don't have any money, and we really don't have any money. And especially with the ESSER funds ending, we can't put more recurring costs into the budget because it's only going to compound, you know, what we have to deal with once the ESSER funds run out. So with that, I'm sorry I went a little over, Mr. Sanchez, but Mr. Sanchez is going to go. Yeah.
Heather, you do such a great job, and with those ESSER funds coming from the federal government to the state as well as to the district, that it's actually presented to you, our budget committee, but you do a great job in making sure that people, the public, know how those ESSER funds are used by highlighting that in your budget proposals and your statements that go to schools as well as to anybody online that's looking, because once this is all over with, someone's going to say, you had all of this money, what did you do with it? And we didn't know. So could you tell everybody how you do that? And I'm just pleased when I see how it's spent, because it is out there for the public to see.
It is, and I do include it in each of the budget workshops within the appendix. We have a detail of all the student academic support programs that we have at each of at the school sites. I have a link to the student academic support plan manual that goes into detail as to each of the academic programs. We have an outline, and I'll have a pie chart that gets a high-level overview of how the funds are utilized, and then that student support plan gives the real detail. It's probably a 50-page manual. We accept board comments. The public can come to our board meetings and recommend and ask for how the funds are being used. We do get public requests. We go through audits. We are going through a review right now from the state. That's in addition to the audit that since these are considered high-risk federal funds, they're audited by our external auditor every year. And you do have a lot of flexibility in how these funds have been utilized. So we did pivot and shift because initially we weren't going to use them for supplemental payments to employees, but that initiative started with the governor by saying that the staff are the ones who had to deal with the brunt of, you know, implementing and all of the initiatives with this change in COVID was so much work, additional work for the teaching staff, the support staff. We've had issues with recruitment and retention ever since COVID. It compounded, you know, the issues that we had with hiring. So we've been trying to you know, invest some of those funds into, you know, improving morale and, you know, to thank people for all the hard work that they've done and continue to do, you know, as we work through and try to come out of the whole COVID experience. And I'll go through that in more detail when we go through the special revenue fund.
Okay, thank you. So I think I should give a little disclaimer that I'm not usually this casual, even on Fridays, but today we are having a barbecue later on, so I think the superintendent would be okay with me inviting you guys to stick around if you wanted to stick around for the barbecue.
I was going to let them know they can come, and I brought jeans to change into, so me too.
Yeah. And also February is Love the Bus month, so I'm representing our transportation people with my shirt. So I'm going to get into,
Mr. Brooks had his hand up.
there we go.
Are you guys delivering barbecue to schools?
You know where we are. Come on.
What time does it start? I'm going to have to sneak off.
11:30, right?
Yeah, 11:30.
Yeah. Come on
Enjoy,
down.
guys. Thank you, Heather.
All right, come on down. All right, so let me get into the capital budget a bit. Leanne Evans, our treasurer, usually gives a piece of this. She's the expert on the the revenue side of the capital budget and how we can spend money, and I'm more on how we spend the money. I just get the money out the door so we get things done. But I'll try my best to cover some of the things that Leanne would normally cover. So we usually do a 5-year capital plan. We've extended to 10 years so we can project out for the entirety of the sales tax referendum. So that's and we usually use the last year's plan as the starting point where we get off. There's going to continue to be projects added and deleted and changed throughout the course of this development process. The actual budget's not approved until later on this year. The capital funds are used for mainly for building and maintaining our facilities, our equipment, our vehicles. So things that last 5 years or more are considered part of the capital budget. But we also use money to pay for the maintenance of our facilities as well, as Heather spoke about earlier. In the gray box over there, you see some of the major changes that we made last year to the capital plan, or this current year to the capital plan. So I won't go through the list of projects, but if you have any questions about any of those projects, please feel free to ask me about them. And then on the right-hand side is that pie chart similar to what you saw on the general fund and how that money is being spent. You can see a large portion of it is being spent on facilities and reserves, technology. Showing the 2% for security, that's really a bit of a misnomer because a lot of the stuff that we spend on facilities also has to do with security, enhancing our security with doors and windows and making sure our facilities are in great shape. So this is on the sales tax specifically. So the revenues, the first bullet points out that the revenues are exceeding what we originally projected. So as of December, we collected $901 million versus $737 million. So we're, as you can see, that we're far exceeding our projections.
Yeah, so I was just going to interject that.
Yeah.
And so it's most likely going to sunset early,
Right.
if this continues. But you never know what's going to happen, because we did have COVID, and then we had no sales tax collections for a couple months. But we did rebound quickly, very quickly in Florida. So we do expect that we're going to sunset early.
Right. So, and that bullet points out that early means December 2025 instead of December 2026 is what we're looking at. But we still generate more than enough money to, a lot of money that we can pay for our projects even with the inflation. As you can see the expenses at the bottom set of bullets down there that we have already spent as of November, over almost $550 million. So some of the things that need to be considered when we put together the capital plan, of course, is enrollment projections, because that determines when we do additions in new schools. The academic program changes that we have. One of the things that we're talking about a lot right now is technical centers, and that has an impact on the capital budget. The condition of facilities, marking conditions, revenue forecast changes, any legislative changes, and then, of course, the board priorities, which probably should have been the first bullet.
No, we saved the best for last.
Yeah, of course, that's what we do. Okay, got it. Council of Grady City Schools, we are part of this consortium of the largest school districts in the country, and they have recommendations that we try to align ourselves with as well. They also, they point out, just like with your home, you want to have adequate funding for your preventative and predictive and planned maintenance, so you're not just responding to emergencies all the time. So we try to do that. They make a recommendation between 2% and 4% of your budget is focused on building replacement and maintenance spending. So again, we stay within that range as well. Every 5 years is recommended. They recommend that you do a facility condition assessment, and we added the cost of that in our last year capital plan. So we're going to be going through a solicitation process to select a firm to do that for us. So one of the things that when I came in, I wanted us to kind of systematize what we do and how we treat our facilities. And basically, our facilities have about a 50-year lifespan is what we try to build for. But we don't want to wait to 50 years before we do anything in the facility. So in the years 10 to 12 approximately, we want to do a refresh of that facility, and that includes those things that indicate in the column called scope of work. interior, exterior painting, selective MEP work, some restroom renovations, FF&E, and ADA compliance, and CSRs, which are our comprehensive safety inspection reports. And then in the mid-years of the life of that facility, around year 25 or so, we're going to do additional things, replace MEP systems, not just upgrade them, do major upgrades in roofing, because typically roofs last 25 to 30 years. Replace doors and windows as necessary, upgrade the parking lots and landscaping, things like that, and play courts. And then again, at years around year 35, 37, we want to do another refresh. And then finally at the year 50 to 53, we want to do a comprehensive replacement of the school. So these are some of the things that are in the capital plan. And remember, this is we're looking at a 10-year window, so $743 million of the various projects. Not going to go through all of them again, but if you have any questions about them, please feel free to ask. This was last year's plan. Is going to talk to a little bit about some of the changes that we're proposing for FY24 and beyond. So facilities projects, $2.2 billion worth of work. These are facility renewal projects, the maintenance projects, and you hear the term deferred maintenance. That's what this category of work is. It's a lot of roofing, windows, things like doors that need to be replaced. So a lot of maintenance work that's involved with this, and so to manage our budget and we shift money or shift projects around in the funding sources for different projects. So we shifted the funding source for 4 of our large high school facility renewal projects. We shifted the funding from from sales tax to I believe to COPS to pay for that. And then also the River Beach Prep was another one of our major renovation projects. We shifted the funding on that. Inlet Grove is being funded by sales tax, but that project was increased in size as well. So some of the things that we've changed, we're doing media center upgrades for all of our high schools. We're doing these 21st century media centers. Acceleration of BMMP is Building Envelope Management Program. So that's basically the roofing, the recaulking and repainting of the schools. When I came in here in October of 2021, we hadn't painted a lot of schools in over 20 years. So I made a goal of painting over 100 schools by the end of this school year, and we're well on the way of doing that. So you should be seeing a lot of, if you drive around schools, you see a lot of them are getting repainted now. We're starting to do some interior painting of our schools.
I was just curious about the digital marquees in the guardhouses. Have those projects begun?
We're getting started with those right now. So we're they require designers, so they have to be designed and built. Yeah. So we're starting at the high schools for the digital marquees, and we're going to be working our way down to the middle and then to the elementary schools. And the guardhouses are right now for the high schools, and eventually we'd like to get to the middle schools as well.
Just to add that, and Carmen Campbell represents District 6. Royal Palm Beach High School is a bit different from the group, and Mr. Sanchez, you could probably let them know. The village has been working with us. We will be the first ones to take off. We're not in that little group that we're talking about right there. Mr. Sanchez, can you talk about that?
Yeah, Royal Palm Beach High School, we had to go through this several meetings with the village to get that approved, and it's finally approved, and we should be getting a digital marquee for that high school this spring.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Playground shade covers. We're in this, as Mr. Barber said, we're in Sunshine State, right? And we have kids who are playing in these playground structures. We want to get them some covers so they're not baking in the sun, and that equipment is pretty hot sometimes. As you get closer to the summer, so we want to make sure we're protecting them with that. We have a couple of schools that do not have baseball and softball lighting. It's only a few of them. I'm talking about high schools. So we want to, I think there's only 2 of the 23 high schools that don't have it, so we want to take care of those. I think Palm Beach Central is one of them, and I think Pahokee is one of them as well. Facility condition assessment, I mentioned that before. So security projects, we spend a lot of money of that over the next several years. The bidirectional amplifiers help improve the radio transmission within buildings. Guardhouses, I already talked about. Sally ports, we're actually changing the terminology to security vestibules. This is, you have a single point of entry, and then once you get past that main entrance, you are confronted by somebody who's again checking verification that you belong at that school, and then they will buzz you into the school further. So we're implementing that. A lot of fences and gates, cameras, card readers, intrusion alarms, and then one of the things we're looking at is outsourcing the maintenance of our security systems because we simply can't hire enough staff to keep everything maintained. We have tens of thousands of security cameras and card readers, and it takes a lot of manpower to keep that stuff running properly. Technology projects, we're doing a lot with educational technology, and if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, so with the technology projects, I mean, just in enhancing what we already have, and technology is ever-changing. So we always have to upgrade, enhance cybersecurity, network infrastructure, continue to refresh our computers, because as part of COVID, we went to one-to-one devices, and so now we have to make sure that we continue to maintain that. The repair, we didn't consider when we went to one-to-one that there were going to be devices that were broken. And then the school needed to have a pool of computers on site to be able to keep them at one-to-one. So we're working to add a pool of available computers at each school so that we can make sure to have equity, because there are just certain students that just don't have a computer at home. And so that's added into the computer refresh. So in addition to that, adding additional ones. And then I do have to say, Ms. Evans wanted me to say this is her favorite slide. She loves this chart, and she still has when we had the green bar at the top there is when we used to get 10 mills. So, 2 mills. So for capital funding purposes, prior to the recession, capital was funded based on 2 mills. That was the revenue we received. During the recession, it was cut by a quarter, and then they cut it by another quarter, and the state promised to give it back to us. And here we are in 2023, and they never gave it back to us. So if we had that money, that is the capacity that we would have. Where we are right now is 1.5 mils, which is the red line. And our board policy is that we're allowed to have debt capacity of 50% of the 1.5 mils. And so that marks, what that threshold is. The state statute is 75%. We're more conservative, that it's only 50% of the 1.5 mils.
And it's going down.
And it's going down, and so it does show that we have capacity to issue debt in the future. But what I do want to mention is, the ALPAGA study, that if we do have to share the capital funds with charter schools, that's going to take a significant chunk of funds, because we don't know what that would look like, because it says it would be based on, they're recommending needs basis. Most likely at some point that would shift to per student, and then why stop with charter schools? Are they going to then give it to vouchers as well? So there's so much uncertainty that it looks like we have a lot of room in those out years, but with the uncertainty, that could change in one legislative session.
So do charter schools own their property?
There are very few actually own their own property. Most of the charter schools, it's either, if they're small, they're in a strip mall, so they're just renting. And then when you have these big management companies, the management companies actually own the land in the building, and then they lease it back to the charter school. And so they're using taxpayer dollars in order to fund a public, or a private building that, if the school goes out of business, they could easily convert it to an office building. And so if you look at these management companies, really what they are, they're real estate companies. Being funded through
It doesn't quite
tax
say
dollars.
to me, but-
Yep.
So there's additional capital projects or capital funded, things that we have to cover, such as school buses and vehicles and other equipment that we that we use to maintain our facilities and to move students around. A lot of equipment. We replace furniture on a regular basis. We talked about musical instruments earlier. A lot of our TV studios in our schools need to have their equipment updated. Heather talked about the property and flood insurance. We have.
Well, what I can add with that is we were paying about $11 million for our property insurance. So when we renewed for this year, it went up to over $15 million. So that's a significant increase in 1 year. And so we expect that trend to continue as well.
You see reserves within charter schools, as we talked about a little while ago. So some of the things that we have proposed for this year, we talked about canceling the Forest Hill High School addition, because we're doing the boundary change now with Dr. Garcia High School. And also we're doing a small remodeling project. One of our board members asked us to look at not canceling this project yet, so we're going to be bringing back some information to the board in response to that request we had at our last capital project meeting. Some of the things that are also impacting us, we've been impacted by the supply chain issues that a lot of other people have been impacted by. So Grove Park and Melaleuca, which are two schools that are under modernization right now, originally planned to reopen this coming August, but we're going to postpone those openings until a little bit further into the school year. We hope to get those done hope to get them in there before January 2024. And because they're in holding schools, Grove Park is currently occupying the second floor of Lincoln Elementary, and Melaleuca is occupying some portables at Crestwood Middle School. The next two schools are supposed to be going to those same holding schools. So Winbrook and Westbrook are in turn somewhat delayed because of, or not somewhat, they are delayed because of those other two projects not being completed. One other change is we're looking to build a new elementary school out in the western acreage area. Right now we're looking at the Arden location. We own a piece of land that was donated to the district for that school, so we're looking to move that up to August of 2028. Or 2027, sorry.
I'd just like to compliment Mr. Sanchez. We worked closely with the Melaleuca modernization and working with Crestwood Middle School as well as the other schools. You're out in the community with these transitional schools while we're building the modernization schools, and making sure elected officials and communities are involved to know there's going to be a change in that community. And everybody's working together. Ms. Campbell, you probably can see right in your neighborhood with the new elementary school, it's just moving like clockwork. And that's because of your ability to go out to these meetings and working with the community to let them know the change is taking place while we modernize these other schools to make sure that we have great facilities for everyone.
Thank you. So a couple other new projects that we're proposing is we have some warehouses. One is called McKesson, and the other one is called Australian Avenue, and both of those are over 35 plus years old, and we're looking to either renovate or replace those warehouses because they long past their lives. Security, I mentioned the bi-directional amplifiers that we're looking to do, and then upgrading the intercoms in our schools to this EPIC system. Intercoms haven't changed much over the years, but now this new EPIC system is kind of revolutionary. It allows the schools to have a lot more flexibility with how they communicate with their teachers. So the capital development plan, we still have a lot of work to do. So we're benefiting from property values increasing, but there are some concerns, as Ms. Frederick mentioned before, about legislative changes that could be coming down the road with student station calculations and possibly allowing charter schools to get some of the money that's been historically going to district schools. And then there's the additional maintenance needs. We're struggling with hiring enough staff. We have hundreds of vacancies in our maintenance department, and it's just very difficult to fill those positions. Matter of fact, you may be surprised to know we have 2 irrigation techs that take care of the entire school district. I have 13 plumbers to take care of 180 schools. So it's really difficult for us to keep up with the staffing needs. So we are, like I mentioned, we have, our budget process is just getting started, so there's gonna be a number of, changes that we're gonna see over the next several months. Then I'll turn it back over to you.
So for the committee, the board approved a 10-year capital plan, which included, FY '24. So that's what we use as a starting point, is that capital plan that was approved by the board last year. And then we make changes to that. So it's not like we're starting from scratch. It's starting with, that's why we look out 10 years. So you never know what's going to happen, but we're always moving projects up or moving them back because there's supply chain issues. But we already have a plan of what we're going to be doing over the next 10 and even more, even further out than that when we're thinking about schools and where the need potentially will be. Okay, so now I know, Mr. Sanchez, you have to leave, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sitting through the first part, so
No
thanks.
problem. Hope to see you guys at the barbecue.
All right, so now the last large chunk of our budget is special revenue fund. And so special revenue fund, that's everything that's federal, state, and local monies that we receive, grant funds, so they're restricted in some way. So we're given the money, but we have rules as to how we need to spend it. We have to track it, and if we don't spend it on all the funds, we either have to return it or we have to get approval to get an extension or spend it in some other way. And so that's why I have, when we're looking at our total special revenue fund, ESSER is the largest chunk of it right now. It's 65%. The title funds are almost 20%. IDEA is 10%. And then we have all the others. And this does not include school food service. School food service is considered a federal program, but I have them outside of this process. So within the chunk of other, it's 8%. We have a lot of miscellaneous other grants. Some are federal, some are state, and most of them are local. When looking at the ESSER, title, and IDEA, those are all federal funds. So Nicole Smith, she's the director of federal and state program, so she's in charge of our title grants. Mr. McCormick, he's the director of special education, so he's in charge of the IDEA grant. And Mr. McCormick actually, he texted me that he looked up how many home education students we have. So as of today, we have 1,332 home ed students in Palm Beach County. So we're going to go through the different grants, and I asked Nicole, Ms. Smith, and Mr. McCormick, since they're the experts, to be here to go through their grants. So we're going to start with IDEA. So I'm going to give that to Kevin. Kevin has been just a great partner to work with. We've been working closely for, it's got to be at least 8 years, and have been able to make so many improvements with how the funds are utilized, not only within IDEA, but within the general fund budget, by giving the flexibility of, I always said, I don't want to cut the amount of money that we're spending, but if you can figure out ways to spend it differently, whatever savings you have and you generate, we can put back and reinvest back into the program. So he's been a great partner. He's been so creative on, once he knew that I wasn't going to cut the money, and I earned his trust that I won't, whatever he saves, I keep it and I give it back to him every single year. And I mean, that we've been doing this for at least 8 years, and he's made so many improvements within special education, and we've been able to see the results of that with the academic improvement of the special ed students.
Absolutely, and thank you, Heather. And I do have to say it's been a pleasure learning the business and budget side of how the school district works, and kind of translating between the both of us and our teams of how funding and counts translates to services and meeting the needs of all students. So as the slide says, state funding formula is available. Basically funds services for students with disabilities in addition to IDEA that's allocated from a federal level to be able to, in my terms, supplement a child's education based on their individual needs. These funds may roll forward annually. We do our very best, especially within IDEA, to fully expend the grant annually and make sure that we're meeting the students' needs, both with staffing, supplies, as well as materials as we move forward. So we are responsible in making sure that we meet our maintenance of effort, so that, you know, our school district is expending general funds on students with disabilities, and not only in allowing for IDEA to truly move forward and act as a supplement to that child's education. All special education students with disabilities receive the appropriate level of general education instruction, and that's all determined by each IEP team. My office, Heather's office, and the school district as a whole doesn't make that determination. It's truly the professionals that work with these students day to day and the data that determines the level of service that each child receives. So when students with disabilities receive services outside the general education classroom, the general fund dollars follow them to support the services required. So, brief example, student without a disability gets a fine arts class or a teacher for English language arts. That's general funded. Well, the student with the disability also gets that same level of funding from the general fund for their ELA or math teacher or fine arts period. So the IDEA allocation, we support with staffing such as behavioral interventionists, crisis intervention teachers, ESE resource teachers, paraprofessionals. All of these professionals and services are designed to be able to meet the individual needs of the student and the overall student body of SWDs, students with disabilities, on each and every school district, school campus. The additional personnel in the grant provides supplemental specialized services and resources, also professional development, and all of those supplemental services you see there. The huge investment, and I'm just going to make a quick plug for IDEA ARP, is we've really invested in assistive technology and then training for teachers with supplies to be able to build pedagogy and give a toolbox to our teachers to be able to meet the needs of the students real time right in front of them. So it's been a pleasure working to be able to enhance programs during this unique time within our school district. This is the IDEA allocation PD. We do a lot and then some to be able to support. I do have to say all of these professional development opportunities are available to all of our charter schools as well. Okay, thank you.
So Title I, Part A, we're allocated funds annually, and it's based on poverty census data, comes down through the state to the district. And the purpose is to provide all students with the significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, high-quality education and to close achievement gaps. We really call it the funds that level the playing field for some of our students in higher poverty areas within the district. The state has an ESSA state plan, which basically lays out to the federal government their goals for the use of Title I funds. And so what we do in the district really supports the state's goals as far as utilization of the funds. They want to see students succeed on state assessments. So they want to make sure that they have an opportunity to prove their proficiency just like any other student. So the award is based on a federal funding formula. The award is from July 1st through June 30th. Although we don't really receive our full award notification until later in the year, so a lot of what we do is projection and estimation and good best guess. We submit our grant application to FDOE, and we detail how the funds will be used. We work with 120 Title I schools right now, so each of those schools tells us what their plan is for the funds. We guide them through allowable use. We aggregate that up and then send it off to the state for approval. there are very strict guidelines set down from the state. So there are a lot of things that we wish we could do to further student achievement in our Title I schools that the state really restricts through guidelines. And their guidelines are based on what the state feels is reasonable or allocable. I'm going to give you a great example of that. They have a $3,000 per day cap on consultant fees. So if you wanted to have Kagan Learning come in and bring a couple of experts to present at a school and train your full cadre of 80 teachers, the cap for that would be $3,000 a day. It's very hard to get professional and technical services at $3,000 per day. So we have to work within those strict guidelines.
So this is the money comes from the feds, but the state restricts, the state has the guidelines that might be different from what the federal.
That are more restrictive than the federal guidelines. And also with, for Title I in particular, there was something passed by the legislature.
16, 17 school year.
So, where they're even dictating how much we allocate out to schools, of how much of the amount we can keep for district centralized supported programs versus how much we can allocate to schools. So I think it's 90% almost.
Yes, so we have certain reservations that we're allowed as a district to have. They include like administrative or indirect costs. We can set aside a certain amount for pre-K, foster, homeless, neglected. But after that, only 1% could be held at the district level for district-led initiatives. So besides those few allowable set-asides, the rest of the funds go to the schools.
They wouldn't even let us buy, because I said, well, what about for musical instruments? Before we had the ESSER funds, we wanted to use title funds. That's not something they normally allow. So the supplies, they want to know exactly what supplies are being purchased, how much paper, how many pens. I mean, it's the detail that they get in is, it far exceeds what they are required as an oversight entity. They also did the same initially with the ESSER funds. They added additional restrictions on ESSER funds that were not there by the federal government. They mandated we spend a certain percentage on non-enrollment, a certain percent on technology, a certain percent of the funds on academic initiatives. And the initial ESSER funds had no restrictions like that. So the state is very involved in these what we call entitlement grants, because we receive these grants based on eligible students. We don't actually apply for them. We do have to submit a budget, but these funds are awarded to us based on that we have students that meet the criteria. So they tell us what the award is going to be. Nicole has to work, Ms. Smith has to work with the schools to create a very detailed budget, back to DOE with detailed narrative descriptions as to how each of the funds are going to be used. When you look at what you submit, how many pages is it? I mean, it's...
Probably 100 and some pages with the breakdowns for each schools, and then the private schools and charter schools that we serve as well.
I would think that it particularly puts pressure on the staff development you can do if it has to be spent only at the school, when you can't take advantage of the having numbers together.
Yes, where we're fortunate is the rules, the rules for reasonable, allowable, everything apply to the roll forward dollars, but what doesn't apply to roll forward dollars are those percentage restrictions or allowable set-asides. So we're fortunate when we're able to roll forward money because of vacancies or an influx of other funding. The roll forward dollars allow us to provide some of that district level support. So we've invested heavily in personnel at each of the region offices to provide that coaching and school support inside our schools. So we have a lot of set-asides that I referred to that where we can put some money for Title I. We do a lot with parent engagement, parent involvement. We're required to set aside funds for that use. The majority of those dollars do go to the school sites so that they can engage families on their campuses and support their efforts to support student learning at home. We set aside indirect and administrative costs. We do support the district's homeless programs, neglected and delinquent, pre-K. That's one of our biggest investments with a Title I set aside is our pre-K units. And we are required by law to serve private schools. We do not give private schools funds. We provide them with equitable services. So we develop a plan with them and then assist them in carrying out their plan to support students on their campuses. And like I said, any of the funds that are carried forward are kind of exempt from some of those rules. We have to serve our public school, our charter schools within the district. So eligibility for Title I is based on poverty measures. So annually, and today is our day, we take a snapshot of free and reduced price lunch, or, and now Ms. Frederick alluded to this, direct certification data. We rank and order our schools from greatest to least of that poverty measure, so from 100 down. Our eligibility thresholds are based on the thresholds we used in the 16-17 school year, and that's legislated by Florida law. We cannot go any higher. So our threshold for high schools is 67%. Our elementary, middle, and combination schools is 70%. And so moving to direct certification, we have more schools that will qualify for Title I services in FY24. And if we wanted to, say, raise the threshold so that we're concentrating funds in the higher poverty schools, we are not eligible to do that. We are not allowed by law to do that. Right now, the district has 4 tiers, and we assign a dollar amount, a value for Title I funds that will be multiplied by the number of eligible students to get a school and allocation. We do have the flexibility as a district to move tiers, to assign more tiers, fewer tiers, to adjust that per pupil allocation. So that's where we work really hard to ensure that the highest poverty schools are receiving the highest dollar amounts. And I alluded to this earlier, we take 120 schools, or in this coming year, maybe 140 schools, 30 schools, and work with them to write their plan, assist in the implementation, remove any barriers that we can, and liaison between the state and the schools. So this area is Melissa's area. I'll let you, do you want to speak to Title I Part C?
You can, if you'd like to. You can. Yeah, Ms. Patterson was not able, she had a conflict. She already had a meeting with the guidance counselors. So if you would like to assist, that would be great.
Sure. So the Title I Part C is the Migrant Education Program. It's approximately $3 million. It follows the same project period as Title I, and it's used to serve all identified migrant students birth to 21 residing in the district. Their migrant students are those who are whose parents are involved in migratory or agricultural fishing work. Identification is very important because the allocation is based on identification of those students, so they work very hard to build awareness about the program and eligibility for participation in the program. There's a lot of collaboration through different district departments for supporting our migrant education program. The allocation pays for administration and identification for the program, advocacy, outreach, academic progress monitoring, tutorial programs, summer programs to ensure that these students have extended learning opportunities. the collaboration with other departments, we have 4 migrant pre-K units out in the Glades region to support migrant families. There are social service facilitators who work with the parents. They make sure that they're getting the services that they need, they're building awareness, they're ensuring that they get to appointments, that health care is provided. And then there's a parent involvement element to that, where we work with the families to increase literacy, to build awareness of graduation readiness, and to conduct parent workshops. Title II Part A does reside in my department, and the purpose of that grant is to improve the quality and effectiveness of teachers, principals, and other school leaders. We want to increase the number of effective teachers, and then a big element of that is ensuring that low-income and minority students have greater access to effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. So this is where you see a lot of funds spent on professional development. We do some recruitment and retention efforts with these dollars. Our principal coaches, so the instructional superintendents throughout the district, are funded with Title II dollars. A lot of curriculum staff developers are funded through Title II. And this one is not as restrictive in how you allocate the funds, but it does still require for us to provide either an allocation or services to our charter schools. And we do have to follow all those rules about reasonable, allocable, necessary. So the consultant agreement guidelines still apply to this grant.
All right, with Title III, that's for our ELL students, and I won't be able to do it justice, but I will go through the slides. I mean, so again, these are all entitlement grants. So they have the same timeline, the same start and end date. We have to perform a needs assessment to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the ELL students. Something that they did, started within the past couple years, many grant opportunities. So they allow the schools to submit initiatives that they would like to implement at their school sites. So the department reviews those. And then, as long as they meet the allowable guidelines, that's something that it still has to get submitted to DOE for approval, but it provides some flexibility and gets the schools more involved in to ensure that we're providing, that they're meeting the specific needs of their students. So materials, transportation, software licenses, and then it also supports staff as well. And so you can see the direct support staff that's provided: bilingual counselors, social service facilitators, dual language. We've had an initiative to expand our dual language programs. We have our first year of our dual language program for Creole, Haitian Creole. So I know that we're excited about implementing that dual language program. We have Title III immigrant. So that is, a lot of the same initiatives, same timeline, July 1st to June 30th, software licenses, materials, a lot of the same initiatives you can see that were in the previous.
So Title IV is student supports and academic enrichment. This project period is a little different. You heard me say with Title I that the funds are used basically to support the state's goals around academics, core content. Title IV allows us the provision of a well-rounded education for our students. It also supports safe and healthy student programs and improving the effective use of technology in order to advance digital literacy. So they mandate that we spend a certain amount of funds in each of the categories. There is a cap on technology devices. So the purpose of the funds isn't to provide the devices, it's to teach teachers how to teach students how to effectively use that technology in the classroom. We have some great activities and initiatives within the district funded with Title IV. We have global education, which allows for some of the language programs in our schools and professional development for the teachers. We support Italian instruction. There's Chinese, Japanese. It's fascinating. We also support dual language programs. We have international Spanish academies that are, the lead teachers are funded through these dollars. There are tutorial programs. There's IB support, STEAM infusion support. We have behavior coaches and case managers funded, so that supports the transition back to the regular school program from juvenile justice. It also helps with restorative justice and those initiatives. Skills for Learning in Life, formerly called social emotional learning. We have 2 coaches that are funded that help implement those skills for learning in life lessons and curricula throughout the district. There is support for positive behavior supports and learning initiatives, African American, Hispanic, Latino gender studies. We support the institutes in the summer through some contracted services. We have some wraparound supports in safe schools. And then a Train the Trainer Trailblazer initiative. So the district has had the Train the Trainer initiative for a long time, where designated teachers from the school centers come into the district, receive training from our district folks, and then go back on their campuses and share the knowledge that they've gained and increase the effectiveness of digital infusion within the classroom.
21st Century Community Learning Grants. This is now a competitive grant compared to all the others were entitlement grants for after-school enrichment opportunities. Our district seems to be awarded every single time we apply. The department has done an outstanding job in implementing the program. It goes to show that the Florida Department of Education believes that our programs are academically sound as to why we have so many participating schools. And so now getting into our ESSER investments. So there were 4 real primary initiatives with the ESSER funds. We started with safe operation of school for students and staff. So we had enhanced cleaning, increase in supplies. So we're not doing as much as of the facility cleaning, although we have just changed and enhanced just our normal cleaning procedures. And like I said, resulting in increased usage of soap and paper towels. And I mean, there was one year that we spent almost $5 million on wipes, the wipes that like the Clorox wipes. So when you think of the size of our district, the amount of money that we were spending.
Well, I can imagine the space it takes.
Because we started with having the spray and the rags, but then the rags need to be washed, and there's all these things that you don't think of until you actually start to implement them. And then that's where we also added the employee retention, the emergency disaster pay, and that was really, at the initial initiative of the governor, providing emergency disaster pay bonuses. So that's something that we've continued over the last 3 years. The main focus is on unfinished learning initiatives. So we have in their curriculum, we've been able to utilize this funding to help supplement our textbook adoptions, because the state does not provide enough money to fund the cost of a textbook adoption. Our allocation is about $14 million a year. A normal adoption is $20 to more $20+ million a year. So we were able to, the state of Florida approved putting textbook adoptions within this funding. We added 370 positions approximately 370 positions to support in the student academic support plan. And so in the appendix, I have the detail of each of those initiatives. We expanded access to PSAT and SAT to juniors, where we're paying for that. And for tutorials, we added a significant amount of money to the schools for tutorials, but then we also purchased centrally, contracted with a vendor to provide 24/7 tutoring. That was implemented in January of last year with a company called Paper. We went through an RFP, and they can chat with the students, and they can do that because, you know, at midnight if they're working on their homework, or 10 o'clock when they're working on their homework. They can also chat with them during small group instruction during the school day. So we noticed that there are a lot of metrics with this that the vendor provides, so we can see what schools are using it, what students are using it, the times a day they're using it. So we did see increased, we did have a decline in usage going into this year, so we made a push to see whether we could increase usage. This is not something we would have been able to afford without the ESSER dollars, so it's something that we're continuing to monitor the metrics to see if the usage does not go back up, then it's not going to be something that we're going to continue to fund.
Question, was there any correlation of the schools that use these services increasing graduation rates? Do we track that, or?
That's something that we could look into. I don't have that information.
I just was curious. Okay.
Yeah. But that is something, because we have it by school, and so that is something that I could provide. We expanded our summer program. I talked about the textbook adoptions. So we were using this to, you know, help with the textbook adoption, because that frees up money within the general fund that's still set aside for textbook adoptions, because the money we're getting from the state has to be used for instructional materials, but it's going to allow us to pay for textbook adoptions in future years that we didn't think that we were going to have the money to fund. We also use the funds to support social, emotional, and mental health services. We added additional extra duty days for the community language facilitators so that they could work on providing additional supports to the students as well as the parents when it came to registration and any needs that they had over the summer months. We expanded the co-located service providers. The problem that we're having is we've expanded co-located service providers, but they're having the same issue we are in terms of hiring. So we're looking into what can we do, because even if we were to add the positions, we wouldn't be able to hire, but we didn't want to add positions when we know the funds are going to be going away. We also added investments in technology, and we added additional Chromebooks, like I mentioned, that we're funding from the capital projects, but we also have some expenses within ESSER as well. This is where we also put in some additional funds to repair some temporary positions to help oversee the whole repairing initiative. We're still funding Wi-Fi, expanded Wi-Fi for students that don't have access to Wi-Fi, and upgrading. We were looking a lot for one-time initiatives, non-recurring initiatives. So the upgrade of our backup power supplies is something that we need to replace those once every 10 years. So we're utilizing those funds because it isn't something that we're going to have to do again for 10 years. Like the musical instruments, $10 million in musical instruments. That's something we don't need to do again for another 10 years as long as we keep them repaired and serviced. And we have to pass through to charter schools as well as our indirect cost, almost $90 million. So in looking at the FY23, we're projected to spend about 160, almost 170 million. In FY24, that would leave us another 160 million to spend, you know, for a total of $600 million. And then the funds they've ended. And in looking at ESSER 1, that amount that's remaining is related to charter schools. So the district has spent our full amount, so that little bit that's remaining is related to the charter schools, and we can't force them to spend the funds. But we do plan to spend the full amount of the ESSER 2 and 3. But I can't speak for the charter schools.
So if they don't spend their share, does that come to the district?
I don't believe it does. We would have to ask whether it would, because by the time we don't know that they spend it, even if we're
Yeah.
giving them reminders, by then the grant is over. And then I don't think they would agree to give it to us either. Most likely they would not. So with the timing, it makes it difficult. So in looking at June 22 to December 22, we have shifted a little bit in how we're spending our funds. So for the technology, I do project that we'll probably be spending a little more on technology than we had planned. And that reduced and came out of the safe operation of schools, because we were going to put picnic tables at every school. That ended up being a much more complex project than we expected, having to ship be able to buy enough picnic tables and then to install them all, because you can't just put them on grass. They have to be on pads. They have to be secured. So we ended up that, by the time that we were able to get that done, there wasn't that need to be able to eat outside. So we're redirecting some of the funds that we had set aside now to other initiatives. And so every 6 months, at least every 6 months, we have to report to the public. So I include this slide in every board workshop. I'll include it in every budget advisory committee, reminding the public that they can come to the monthly board meetings, they can email the board, and we also have a dedicated email, artfeedback@palmbeachschools.org. We have yet to receive an email there, but I have received public records requests for information, and so we have been providing it to the public that way. It's also available on the state website in detail, how the funds are spent. And so looking at the ESSER funding cliff, we need to make sure to manage the end of the ESSER funds. In February of 2022, the Florida Department of Ed said, please everybody, please use this on one-time funds. Don't use it on recurring costs, to try to help minimize that funding cliff. And so we were very strategic from the beginning. The only positions that we put in the ESSER funds were ones, teaching positions we knew we could absorb back into the budget easily based on just our normal attrition. But we do have just increase in the cost of supplies. We have to decide whether we're going to continue with the expanded co-located services, which that we could probably cover if we see an increase in property values, because the co-located service providers fall within the referendum as an allowable cost. We added HEPA filters, air purifiers to every classroom. They cost $6 million. It costs $3 million a year to replace the filters. Is that something that the schools are really using? Is that something that we're going to continue? COVID health claims. We've been allowed to charge our increase in our health claims related to COVID to ESSER. So we have charged $30 million to ESSER for health-related COVID claims. So that is part of also why we need to have an increase in health premiums, because we've been able to supplement the increase that we've been seeing in health claims by the ESSER funds, about $10 to $12 million a year. So I was expecting that to dwindle. United Healthcare, we're a self-funded program. United Healthcare is the one who administers our health plans, so they have to send us a report to say this is the total amount of claims that relate to COVID. We've also added health screening machines at each of the schools to test for COVID as well as flu. So we have to look at the usage of those tests. So our anticipated annual usage for tests was going to be $2 million a year. We'll have to see whether that's what the usage is or whether it's less. But we use the ESSER funds to actually purchase the units, so this is just the recurring costs of the tests. And then we added, as part of the ESSER funds, the student re-engagement team, and that was a team of individuals to help to find students that were not coming to school, and then also to keep the students engaged in school. So to keep in contact with them throughout the year to make sure that they come back. So these are just some initiatives to say, okay, well, which ones do we want to continue? Which ones are working? Which ones have we seen that have an impact? And some we just have to do, like the increase in the COVID supplies. We're very thankful for the support of the voters to renew the referendum. Like I said, we'd be having a very different discussion if we were short $275 million. I'm very concerned about what enrollment is going to look like in terms of what's going to happen with the expansion of vouchers. I don't know that the bill is going to pass in its current form, but it's going to pass in some way, in some fashion.
Does the board or the district have any activities to inform the legislature of our positions?
Yes, we do have a legislative platform, and so we're now, so we've added House Bill 1 as well as the sovereign immunity. Because those, I don't deal with all of the legislative issues, I deal with the ones that are financial related, and I mean, those were the new ones that have just been added.
No, you're very.
And we're thinking also about trying to educate the public a little bit about HB1, because many people don't know what it means. It sounds great, but it's not all of the things they think it is.
Well, not only, it doesn't really sound good, and I think that that's why you need to educate. It sounds very frightening. Public schools are what this has made this country the special place it is, and for us to defund them in this way is really very destructive to the ongoing success of this nation.
Well, we're actually traveling to Tallahassee to be with the legislators. We've actually had the session with them, with our legislative delegation, and we know we have to go into the public. I think a lot of parents think that this money, this little small pot of money, is going to do what they need, and they think it's a good thing. So we just truly have to educate them. It's truly bad for the public schools. It's bad for our students. And we have to market and let them know that we are the best choice. And we're making those decisions and working on plans as we speak.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the challenge too is it's not a level playing field, because we have so much accountability placed on public schools, yet the money going to private schools has no accountability, or very limited. I mean, what they have to do. So that's what, let us compete. We're fine to compete, but it needs to be fair, and they need to have the same accountability that we have if they're going to receive this funds.
All means all.
Yeah. So uncertainty enrollment, what's going to happen with the expansion of the voucher program, that will have a significant impact on our enrollment, on the statewide enrollment, and the state education budget in total. All you're doing is just adding more kids onto the roll. They're going to be watering down, the per student funding that we receive. The legislative increase in FRS is concerning because it's really not funded. I mean, if you look at what we received in our base student allocation, it funded the increase in FRS potentially. If I'm right on the low end, but it could be as much as 35 million potentially. And then what other unfunded mandates are they going to come out with this session? Because they come out with them every year. And if it's not in a session, it's in a school, State Board of Education rule that they send out, and they're adding, just an additional administrative burden, on the district. Health claims are a concern, continuing to monitor them. They're not going down to pre-COVID levels, I know that, but where are they going to settle? And then, so we are going to have some sort of increase in the health premiums. We're not going to have the ESSER funds anymore in order to supplement the increased costs. Monitoring the ESSER, the end of the ESSER funds, and making sure to minimize the impact of the ESSER funding cliff. And then Mr. Sanchez, we both talked about that the sales tax is expected to sunset early in December of 2025. So what is that going to look like for the future? So our next Budget Advisory Committee is March 31st. So that will be a month into the legislative session, since it starts March 7th. We'll have a board workshop 2 weeks after that on the 12th. The last day of the legislative session is the 5th. So we'll have another budget advisory committee on this 26th and another one on June 2nd, if it's necessary, because the purpose of the committee is to provide a report to the school board as to whether they support the budget that the district is presenting. Then we have the tentative budget adoption is on August 7th, and final budget adoption is on September 13th. So if there are any questions, and then in the appendix, I go through just some additional information on ESSER, and here's where we have each of the different programs within the supplemental academic support plan, and a link, that's a live link that you can click on that takes you to the student academic support plan. All right. So if there aren't any questions, the next item on the agenda is to select a chair and a vice chair, because we have to do that for the first, or did you have a question?
Not a question, but I really love the logo at the bottom of the page, educate, affirm, and inspire, and that seems new to me, and I think that's wonderful if we think of that for all students and all of the employees also.
And that came out of the strategic plan, is actually part of the, I think it's the mission of the board. And that was something that, you know, Mr. Burke was able to identify in speaking with the board. That's the main board priorities and goals. And
it's clear, it's important, and I love it.
so the board worked hard on on that mission statement. It was over several meetings, and it has been a way to just coalesce.
And before we select the chair and the vice chair, I would just like to say again, thank you to all of you for your work. It is fabulous. We have been able to keep it together throughout this pandemic as we've moved forward. But, you know, there's so many constraints with the state as well as the federal government, and to keep our schools funded so that we can have the best programs possible for success means everything. And I have to tell Mrs. Frederick, she followed Mr. Burke. She's awesome. The board is very pleased with how she's kept us together financially and working throughout all of this. But you have been our oversight to make sure that everything's working smoothly. And I certainly want to thank you as I represent the board. And we worry about vouchers and watering down the public school district schools, because we are the best choice. We're an A-rated district from all across around the state. We're one of two of the major big urbans that's rated A. But we want to continue that, and we do need the funds for our schools to do the things that we need to do. Our referendum, it was exciting. I'm sure you all went out and lobbied for us and helped us to get that. But right now, with what's happening at the state level, I'm asking you to continue to work with Mrs. Frederick and the superintendent and the board, because we've got to get our voices out, because if the monies are continually taken away from public schools, we're in trouble here. And I know parents think things great are happening with all of these fancy titles and things that they think they're getting. But really, many of those children end up back in the public school system, and then the money is gone, and we don't have what we need to educate them and service them. So keep up the great work, and it was nice seeing all of you today.
And I did want to mention that Ms. Schulstrom is the last remaining member from when the Budget Advisory Committee was first created and developed. So, yeah. So thank you for still being here. All right, so I wanted to go to the chair, selection of the chair and the vice chair. I did let everybody know that there is a board policy that limits the term to 4 years. Ms. Brown has been the chair for the last 4 years, but there is an option within the policy if the board if the committee votes on it, that I can go back and present to the board approval to extend the term to pass the 4 years. So that's something for the committee to consider if they would like to. I just wanted to give you that option.
So I'd like to nominate Sherry and ask you to go fight for her if she would be willing to continue.
I'm okay with it, and I know we have some new members, so it would give you a nice year to kind of get acclimated, and hopefully we'll, maybe after a year, someone else would like to step in and do it too, but I'm fine with it if you want me to.
You second? Okay.
Absolutely. I think with everything going on right now, it's important to have that continuity.
All right, so, so all in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll start, well, now I have to now go into, I will now take nominations from the committee members for the chair. Are there any nominations? So it would be Ms. Brown, because the first vote was for taking it to the board for approval of the extension. And then, so all in favor of electing Ms. Brown the chair? Aye. All right, so all opposed, say nay. So everybody was supported. So thank you, Sherry. You will now be the chair as long as the board approves, and they haven't not approved anybody that we've sent for asking for extension of the term. And so I'll now take nominations from the committee members for the vice chair. Are there any nominations for the vice chair? Our current vice chair was Ms. Karen Marcus, who's no longer on the committee. So Ms. Benino, you replace Ms. Marcus. So are there any nominations for the vice chair?
I'm wondering if there's anyone who'd like to do it.
I'll nominate Lori.
Okay, all right. Is there,
Second?
all right, all in favor? Aye, okay, and so thank you, Mr. Parks. So that's unanimous, so congratulations, Ms. Benino, for being the vice chair. All right, so our next meeting, like I mentioned, is March 31st at 9 to noon. It's not going to be as long because this was an overview of just what is in the budget, because we, a lot of it is based on schools, which is based on a school allocation formula. And then I'll be able to provide at the next meeting an update of where we are with the departments. We won't be through all of the department reviews, but at least an update of where we are with the departments. Okay, so with that, I guess we. Yep, and I wanted to invite everybody if you wanted to attend the barbecue. Superintendent Burke sent me a text, and he said, please invite everybody to the barbecue. We'll all be serving. So Mr. Burke will be serving, and the leadership staff will be serving. Yeah, question?
I just want to say, I think speaking for all of us, it's your materials and your backup and getting it in a timely fashion ahead of time so we had a chance to digest it, extremely helpful. And any questions that I've had, you've been right there. So thank you. That makes this process a lot easier for us that are just joining.
Yeah, and any questions you have in between, please reach out in the interim, please. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.